Good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode 93 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. We continue our journey into these strange happenstances of the Second Age of Middle-earth with episode 3 of season 2 of the Rings of Power. I'm giving you the meat, and I'm giving it to you raw. I'm not even doing any small talk or no banter. Let's just get straight into that.
Let's get to it. Sean is coming off of a whirlwind tour, international tour. Here we go. Episode 3. Though Isildur is presumed dead in the eruption of Mount Doom, his horse, Beric, finds him alive in a nest of giant spiders and helps him escape. On his way to Pelargir, an old Numenorian colony, Isildur comes across a young woman named Estrid who secretly bears Adar's brand. They are attacked by wild men who steal Beric and are saved by the elf Arendir, who is grieving the loss of Bronwyn, the woman he loved. Bronwyn's son, Theo, dismisses Arendir's attempts to comfort him and offers to help Isildur steal Beric back. As they are doing this, Theo and the wild men are captured by something unknown. In Numenor, Isildur's sister, Eärien, causes outrage when she reveals that Queen Regent Miriel has been using an elvish palantir. And then in parentheses, it says crystal ball, which, yeah, we gathered that. A great eagle arrives at Miriel's coronation following the death of her father, King Tar Palantir. And Lord Belzagar, a supporter of Miriel's cousin Pharazôn, claims that this is a sign of support for Pharazôn. Celebrimbor and Annatar ask the dwarves for mithril so they can make more rings of power. Durin the Third provides it, despite Durin the Fourth's distrust of Annatar. Sean, in our very short pre-recording banter, you said this was your least episode. Your least favorite episode so far.
Well said. This is my least episode.
I'm also tired.
I think at the end of this season, we need to just have a wrap episode where we talk about every instance of a cringe steal from Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson's trilogy.
Okay.
Because I didn't even realize it until you were reading the synopsis of the episode. But a horse being let free to then go save somebody, it's the exact situation with Aragorn after he falls.
The horse name is even similar. It's like this horse is Beric, and the horse that saves Aragorn is Brago.
Brago,
right?
yeah. So that's getting really tiresome of just the constant stealing. So I really do think we should go through and try to find however many times this has happened, but it's been a lot. You're right. This is my least episode. I wasn't a huge fan of it. I thought the stuff in Numenor was boring. My time there in this episode was pretty substantial, and I didn't think I got anything out of it. And then we can talk about your assessment of the entire series kind of based off of this episode and those scenes. But the one thing that I want to touch on first and converse with you about is, why are the Elvish rings not evil? And why are the Dwarvish rings, as we will come to find out? This is not a spoiler. If you've watched Lord of the Rings, you know that the Dwarvish rings were corrupted somehow. So no spoiler alerts. But what's your interpretation of the events and as to why the Elvish rings aren't tainted?
Right. So the episode summary left out the fact that at the end of this episode, not only do the dwarves bring the mithril to Eregion and give it to Celebrimbor and Annatar, but they actually start forging the rings. And we see Celebrimbor accept a piece of mithril from King Durin, and then he's going to walk over and throw it into is it a smelting pot or a melting pot? I don't know.
Smelting pot.
They call it a smelting pot. And before he can drop it in, Annatar, who is Sauron, takes it from him, holds it in his palm ever so briefly, and then drops it in. I guess that is the dramatic representation of Sauron inserting his influence, or it's actually the mechanism by which he inserts his influence. And Sauron, the evil of Sauron is similar to cooties, where you get it if you touch him. I
Yeah,
guess
I mean
that's where we're gonna go. Yeah.
that's my only understanding is when the Elvish rings were made, Sauron didn't hold the mithril. He's not the one who placed it into the molten metals, and then therein lies the difference,
Yeah.
which I don't think is much of a difference. But
I
you
mean,
know,
I guess it would be great if what we needed were more examples of Sauron's power being demonstrated. I think the one example we get, and I think it might be the only example, is his influence over the warg in episode one. Is that right? Episode one,
mm-hmm.
where he is a prisoner of Adar and they chain up the warg in his cell and it's really aggressive. And then he uses the black speech and it's implied that he tries to exert some sort of magical or supernatural influence. And then that warg eventually kills, oh my God, what's that jerk's name? Waldreg.
Waldreg.
Yeah. But we needed other examples of this. And I mentioned as much in our last episode discussion of the eruption of Mount Doom or the ongoing eruption of Mount Doom causing the earthquake in Khazad-dûm. And then we hear Anatar talk about that with Celebrimbor. I would have liked it if we had had a scene where he has his hand to the ground and he can feel the tremors or he gets some sort of sense of what's happening to demonstrate his ability to interact with the world in a more significant supernatural magical way. And just little things like that peppered throughout. It doesn't need to be these huge demonstrations of magical ability like when his body exploded into a snow eruption, but just little things. And I think that would help take away any thought that it's really just him handling the mithril that causes it, or his his very presence. Just do those things to help us appreciate his evil influence, because that's really what Soren is about. And I think we saw that with the like demonstration of the title sequence in episode or in season one, where it's like you have this evil thread that weaves its way through the environment around it, and that's the negative influence of Sauron. And we heard some of that with Galadriel's dialogue. Anyway, that's kind of my thought, my reaction, my deeper reaction to kind of what we saw on screen.
And I think they could have made that a lot better. That whole scene of him holding the mithril and putting it in. If you would have, you don't have to have him say anything. You could because he kind of holds it and then takes a moment and closes his eyes and then drops it in. But if you would have put black speech in the background, like whispers of, like it's his thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
like he's casting a spell of some sort, then I think it would have been easier to buy in. But when he just holds it for a second and then drops it, and then that's supposed to be the only difference between the two, when he had such a pivotal hand in crafting
Mm-hmm.
the first three. Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted a better representation of his power.
Yeah. Or you could do something we talked about in episode one, where the three elven rings are put on and worn and used to heal the tree, seemingly. Where just give us some lighting, give us some special effects to demonstrate how the elves interact with the rings and seemingly wield their power. Maybe do something here where the mithril starts to glow in his hands and he drops it, right before he drops it in. And then maybe there could be it's the power that is coursing through that workshop or something like that is unpleasant to behold. And we get these like little hints that
It's
it's
just a little,
powerful, but
it's a
it's a
little off.
little off. Yeah. And it can be explained away with, oh, well, great power is can be disturbing, but that's why we have to wield it for good or whatever. Just come up with some dialogue
Mhm.
where the characters who want to believe can explain it away.
Yep.
Anything else on the forging of the rings?
No, that's it. We get into the rings a lot more in the coming
Okay.
episodes, especially episode 5.
I am so behind. And
I
can I just?
watched I watched 5 on the airplane back
Oh, okay.
to Washington. 5 might be my favorite episode so far.
Good. I've seen some buzz
Yeah.
that things are gonna, and I'm glad. I'm glad. I will say this: why did they release 3 episodes at once? It is a. This the first The
Because
first few episodes.
they probably knew that the first half of the season was weak. So like let's just get it all out at once. Get like rip the band-aid off, and then we'll
Okay,
go
yeah,
into the
yeah.
better episodes.
I mean, that's such a shitty way where they could have just, made better television, but okay. All right, so do you want to talk about the Numenor stuff or the Pelargir Southlands stuff first?
Let's go Pelargir Southland
Okay,
stuff first,
okay,
and then we can wrap up this episode with your over encompassing interpretation of what ails the show.
okay. So, what did you think of A Sad Day in Orphan Town?
It's so disjointed because this is episode 3, and this is the first time we travel in this season to the Southlands.
To the human parts, like
Yes,
the non-evil
to
human parts,
to
yeah.
Isildur, and
Yes.
yeah, and
The characters
that
we're supposed to
storyline.
like and root for. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have the scene with Bronwyn, who, as we talked about in the trailer and the news articles that were coming out leading up to season 2, that the actress stepped away from the series. And then we kind of wondered what they would do with her. And I think we hinted at it in one of those episodes that
Mm-hmm.
they might just kill her off. And they totally killed her off.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first scenes we have with Arondir, he comes across Isildur on the way to
Rescues him.
Pelargir. Yeah, rescues him. But then we see Bronwyn's body on a funeral pyre. And it's just like he was out there apparently collecting sticks for the
Yeah,
pyre.
which this is one of my things with the show. This is maybe a larger critique, but this will really come to the fore in the next episode because there are multiple things that span episode 3 and episode 4 that jumped out to me as problematic. This sets up one of them, which is he's in the woods gathering wood to burn on a funeral pyre. And then in episode 4, there's an exchange in a high tension situation in which he has to misrepresent that fact, we'll say. And so
Yeah.
he's also really far away, seemingly really far away from Pelargir during this entire encounter. And then we're supposed to believe like he was out there gathering sticks and then like dropped his bundle and went and hid. And he knew this entire thing was happening, but he didn't intervene before the ambush got started. Like it was all a contrivance in order to get him to have his hero entrance. But the broader point is, yes, they killed Bronwyn off screen, and all we see is a body on a funeral pyre.
And then we have interactions between Arondir and Theo, where Theo is basically like, "You're not my dad. You can't tell me what to do."
Yeah.
So Arondir, who has only ever interacted with Bronwyn secretly, it seems.
Yeah, they're very cagey, right? We
Yeah,
don't
for
we
the
never
most
get
part.
anything. We get a little bit of a dramatic romantic climax when she is literally on death's door. And in retrospect, they should have just killed her off.
Yeah,
And that should have been the thing that pushed Theo over the edge to
destroy his home.
just do something bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have that, and then outside of the Isildur being rescued by his horse, escaping a den of spiders for some reason, none of it interested me. Like I wasn't enraptured by any of that Southland stuff, and I just don't care. And then the same thing with Numenor when we get to it. There's a handful of storylines that this show has me intrigued by.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were to focus the whole show this season on maybe 2 or 3 of these storylines and took the time to actually flush them out, I think this show would be so much better. But instead, you have these instances of we're in the middle, or I guess it's towards the beginning of the 3rd episode, and then all of a sudden you just drop Isildur's storyline back in when things are heating up in Eregion, and I want to know what's going on there. When things are heating up with the stranger in Rune, then you have all of the dwarvish storylines, and then the High King storylines, and then the Numenor storylines, and then the Hobbit storylines, and all of these things, they're not spending enough time anywhere to flesh out a good, proper story. And then when they do get back to the stories that I want to hear about, it's so rushed that I can't believe it. Like I don't believe what's happening because Everything is just too
Exactly.
fast paced.
I couldn't agree with you more. The this episode, my reaction along those lines was significant. And I phrase it like this: the show is miles wide and inches deep. We've got all these storylines. We're covering thousands of miles of geography in this imaginary space, but that's completely insignificant to the story because we're jumping around. Characters go where they need to be. They have these really cool visuals and these interesting ideas. Like I will say that the whole idea of the human survivors of the eruption of Mount Doom trying to rebuild their lives, dealing with the struggle to get fresh water and get firewood and feed themselves while also dealing with an army of orcs, but then also this other faction of humans that we're calling them the wild men. That is interesting, but we get the most basic, almost like archetypal scenes. Oh, there is an ambush, right? Gotta, we have to expect that at this point. Oh, Estrid is is she a spy? Is she a turncloak? She has the brand. Is it at the end of this episode where she is trying to cover it up with the knife? Like she's trying to
She's trying to burn it off. Yeah.
burn it off. That reveal could have waited. We didn't need to get that in this episode, right? How about that reveal comes at a moment where like her involvement is critical to Isildur's safety or something like similar to what we get in the next episode. And I don't want to give. I mean, at this point, spoilers are kind of pointless because we're so far behind anyway. But it's like you could have had that reveal in the next episode when, like, there are other wild men involved in that storyline, but they just move so quickly. And the other thing is, sorry, you're gonna jump in.
So your phrase is a mile wide and inch deep.
Yeah.
With the scenes in Numenor, how did you come to that phrase?
Oh my God. So we have in this one episode, we have a funeral for the king. We have uh a ridiculously coincidental encounter at a like random bar, hints at a like class division in Numenor that's not fully explored, and then this coronation, and then like one scene to build up the relationship between Pharazôn and Miriel, and then the coronation scene, which turns into a usurpation scene, all in one moment. And there were so many things there that I would have enjoyed seeing more of. I've said this, but I think I said this in our coverage of the first season, and I know it's a little bit of a tense. It's a point of conflict, right? Because this is supposed to be a show in the world of J.R.R. Tolkien, and he is very much not the like George R.R. Martin kind of lower fantasy, kind of grimy politics things. But I think it's okay to have a little bit of that because it is a part of the story that Tolkien actually wrote. Tolkien wrote about a usurpation and the forced marriage between Pharazôn and Miriel and the factions that existed on Numenor. So I think it is totally fine to get a little bit of this like dirty politicking where Pharazôn is building a power base and like all of a sudden Aarion is turning on Miriel like after her father is very obviously a servant. Like we get nothing nothing that builds out that tension.
Just wait. That gets so much worse.
Oh man, I wish you wouldn't tell me that. I mean,
I'm sorry, but
I mean the thing is it's these try to set up these epic moments that look really cool. The giant eagle landing looked really cool.
a spoiler for episode 4. We
Oh.
never see this fucking eagle again.
Really?
Like, no, this eagle shows up in this one moment, and then at least through episode 5, no more eagle. So then it's like, why did the eagle even show up in the first place? They haven't established that eagles frequent Numenor. So,
Oh, you're right.
like, why
Like-
in this one instance does this eagle just show up? And then if it's supposed to be a symbol of the Valar, why are all of the people supporting our Farazan who are anti-Valar then pointing to it and being like, "Oh, it's a sign the Valar want him to be the monarch or the ruler." It
Yeah.
just none of that makes sense. And
Yeah,
I'm like,
it's like a bunch of atheists are are impressed by a the a Virgin Mary appearing on a piece of toast. Right? Like that's only important to people who believe in it. If you are a disbeliever, it is not important and it shouldn't wow anybody. I guess the idea is that those people switch their allegiance from Muriel to Farazan, but it's like you're also implying that there are already a group of people who support Farazan despite the eagle or regardless of the eagle. So how about that is the tension, not the timing of an eagle arriving. I also just like the way that they execute things is really frustrating because you had that coronation scene where the costumes look really great with the exception being Muriel. I think Haley immediately had a negative reaction to Muriel's costume. She's like, "Oh, that's gross and ugly." But like Farazan's costume is great. The the throne room itself is impressive. The eagle looks great. But then there's far too few people in the coronation, like in the throne room to make it seem significant. And they also a lot of them just look like, for lack of a better term, peasants. Like they're it's a like they just rounded people up off the street and like, here, go to the coronation. And then, do you have any rotten vegetables? Yeah, throw those at Muriel. Like that didn't happen, but that's the type of thing that would make sense based on the crowd they had.
it seemed like a private event.
Yes.
Like if you're going through, and Numenor is large. It's not like one city that we've been experiencing. Like there are multiple cities on the island of Numenor.
Hmm.
The capital is indeed the biggest, but you'd think it would be out in the open with all of the masses to be able to see, not like 20 to 30 selected individuals that will be in this one room. So
I, I mean, it honestly, it should have been on the top of the like mental Tarma, the mountain that's at the center of Numenor, where, according to the lore, that is where the eagles of Manwë nested. And you could even have something like, oh, an eagle hasn't arrived here. An eagle hasn't been sighted here since your father's coronation. And then when you're out in the open, you could have the eagle show up and it could be this omen, right? And but you have to do something. You have to establish that you can't establish the eagle in one conversation between two characters. It needs to be demonstrated differently. Like we need to, and this is what I'm talking about inches deep. One conversation between two people in the scene that immediately precedes the following scene where the thing is then paid off is insufficient setup. Like we there needed to have been at least not an entire episode, but there needed to have been an episode in which the tensions on Numenor are built up, and then we reach a climactic moment of the usurpation. And my concern is like that we're going to get just increasing escalation at Numenor if we've already gotten the usurpation in episode 3. And by your facial expressions, which our listeners cannot see, it seems like I am correct.
just smiling.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you already said that anyway. The other thing is Aarion, the actress who plays Aarion, like seems like she lost a significant amount of weight. Her facial features are much different. Like she looks like a whole different person. In fact, I had to like do a double take to make sure that she wasn't a different person. Did you get that?
I thought she looked older for some reason.
And I think it might have been like a like a weight loss thing that was like not a healthy way to go. I don't want to speculate too much because it's not really polite nor germane, but she looked different enough where it was noticeable.
Yeah, I just thought she looked old.
Maybe she's evil, and that's how they're showing us that she's evil.
I don't know. But yeah, this episode didn't have a lot for me. I wasn't, I kind of hate watched this episode, this one in particular. And I can't say that about episodes 1 or 2. There are parts of those I actually enjoyed. This one, I just like struggled to get through it. Episode 4, where we'll talk about that next week. There's a lot in that one I like.
Mhm.
I really, really liked episode 5. So
Okay.
I'm excited to talk about those in the future. But
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching episode 5 based on what you're saying. We watched episode 4 together, and I had some negative reactions in the moment, but then to be quite frank, there were also things that immediately undid my negative reaction or undercut them, which I'll be more than happy to admit. One other thing that just annoyed me because it happened at the very beginning of the episode was with the whole Beric rescuing Isildur thing. Beric is attacked by orcs and then he escapes after like killing multiple orcs in a pretty epic horse fashion. But then one of the orcs says, "Oh, like let him go. He's running off into the haunted forest or something like that. Like he won't be coming back." Did you catch that?
Yeah, this forest got haunted real quick in a matter of
Really? Yeah,
like
it's like
a
this.
week.
Oh, yeah. So when did when did this forest get haunted? Where did these spiders come from? Like again, something. And the other, I guess, and here's the other thing about that just fed into my miles wide and inches deep comment. We get no mention of these wild men. Like, how are all of a sudden there divisions within the human culture in this area that, like, did they pre-exist the eruption of Mount Doom and the arrival of Adar? Like, we get this idea that there was a royal house of the Southlands, and then that it you know, according to the reality of the situation, is that that house died out a while ago, and Sauron adopted the heraldry for some reason that we still don't, maybe it was to eventually convince somebody of his fake identity. But there's also this division between the wild men and the non-wild men. Like that was just something that was kind of just assumed to be something that the audience would just buy into, which, okay, fine, I get it. There's bad men, but they just like grabbed a phrase from the Lord of the Rings books, like the Dunlendings, basically, right? And it's like just put them here because you need a villain that isn't orcs, even though these could have been orcs anyway.
It feels like they're just using a different word to describe the same people. Like the whole point of the elves being in the Southlands was to watch over the men of that region because they were prone to evil. So I don't know. It just feels like they're the same villains. They're the people who were living in the Southlands. And now they're
They're
just using a different word to describe them.
so they're all wall dregs, basically.
That's what it feels like to me.
But like, why'd you call them wild men and not like evil men or Adar's men or like men of Adar or Mordor men or something like wild men implies that they are culturally distinct from a sedentary, domesticated agricultural society, right? Wild men is the type of like wild men are people who hunt and forage and steal, and they don't have homes and they're different from us. It's like, the Romans calling everybody else barbarians. Like, so it is not sufficiently demonstrated to me what the actual differences are. If it's just evil disposition, then I don't think wild men is an appropriate terminology. And it's just a little confusing to somebody who is trying to consume the material and understand the context for the conflict. Now, if these wild men are never heard from again, it doesn't really matter. It was just another stupid thing, which again is them bringing up a concept that might be interesting because it will provide you a platform to have a couple cool scenes and then ignoring it to move on immediately to some other thing, like the ridiculous relationship between Isildur and Estrid. Which, by the way, again, pedantic Sam, she stabbed him in the fucking thigh. Like, I'm not going to say femoral, she stabbed him in the femoral artery, but he recovered really quickly from a deep stab wound in his leg.
I mean, he
And
is the future founder of Gondor.
yeah, I mean, that could have been done. It's one of those things where you didn't have to write it that way. Like, you didn't have to write it that he so obviously suffered a significant leg wound from probably a dirty knife. And I didn't see him receive medical treatment beyond getting stitched up by Theo, who, by the way, has not been established as being a gifted healer, which they could have.
Like his mom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like his mom, which is like that's retroactive. It's like retconning his character to say that he learned healing from his mom. Just like these little things. I did. I will say this. I did like the fact that when Theo and Arendir are having a conversation, they are also carrying water to fill a barrel in like the harbor area of Pelargir, because it sets up the fact that their fresh water supply is limited. And then we have the introduction of the aqueduct, which is then continued. So
Another
that
issue.
do you have an issue with the aqueduct?
Yeah. Where's the water coming from?
Oh yeah, they don't show us where the water's coming
Yeah.
from. Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in the next episode. But
Yeah.
well, that is it for me. I am as tired as a dog on Christmas from my day of travel. So, Sam, I'm going to let you wrap us up and I'm
All
going
right.
to go lay back down.
Okay, everybody. Thank you for listening to episode 93 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things as we continue our coverage of season 2 of The Rings of Power. This was our episode 3 reaction. Join us next week or later this week for episode 4 and episode 5 as we catch up with the Rings of Power on Amazon Prime. You can follow this podcast on any popular podcast platform. Like us on Facebook, Elves, Rings, Nerdy Things. Send us an email, elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com. Like, subscribe, share this podcast with your friends if you find it interesting, and we will talk to you next episode. Bye.